In this video, we will look at spectator and player violence. We look at this in three ways. We'll look at a couple of different events in which this sort of activity occurred. Then we'll look at the outcomes of that event, and then we will look at any sort of preventative measures that league may have taken to prevent this, as well as suggesting a few others. And in looking at this, I found that this happens in all different types of sports, whether it be football, baseball, basketball, really just any kind of team sport. And it usually starts with some sort of inappropriate contact between the players and the fans, some sort of trash talk between the two. So we'll look at a couple events here. First, the most famous is the Malice at the Palace brawl, which happened in 2004 in a game between the Detroit Pistons and the Indiana Pacers. It happened with about a minute left to go in a game where the Pacers were losing by 15. And Ron Artest, a player for the Pacers, decided to foul Ben Wallace with just a minute left to go, less than a minute. And so obviously the Pistons players didn't like this very well, started some pushing and shoving between the two teams, but nothing got too out of hand. Where it got crazy was when a fan decided to throw his water bottle or whatever drink he had at Ron Artest. This caused him to rush into the stands, followed by a few other Pacer players. And before you know it, all these fans and Pacer players were fighting each other. When things finally settled down, and they got the Pacers to head into the locker room, they were just being pelted by food and drinks as they entered the tunnel. It was just a terrible event in NBA history and just sports history in general. The outcome was that 9 players were suspended for 146 games. They lost a combined over $11.5 million in salary. 5 of the Pacers players were charged with a misdemeanor assault, and 5 fans were also charged with the misdemeanor assault. Ron Artest got the highest suspension or harshest suspension, which was a 86-game suspension, which is the most for any non-drug related suspension in the NBA's history. He also lost almost $5 million in salary. I think it was just a couple $1,000s short of that. And he was also charged with a misdemeanor assault and battery. He was one of the 5. To prevent this, they immediately put in guidelines the next year, such as limiting alcoholic beverages. They only allowed 2 beverages per purchase for each person. So each time you go to buy alcohol, you can only buy at most 2 drinks. No alcohol sales were allowed in the fourth quarter, and they placed at least 3 security guards between the players and the fans each time, which is the most important one, especially with how close the players and the fans are in NBA arenas. The other event is the Bruins versus Rangers brawl, which happened 25 years before the Malice at the Palace brawl. It was a game between the Boston Bruins, and the New York Rangers. The Bruins would end up coming from behind to beat the Rangers in New York. As time expired, a Bruins player tripped a Ranger player, and they started some pushing and shoving again, similar to the Malice at the Palace brawl. And in the middle of this, a fan decided to grab a Bruins player's stick from him and pull it up. This caused the Bruin player to rush into the stands and start fighting. Again, several Bruins players followed him, and it was just a huge brawl in the stands, probably even worse than the Malice at the Palace brawl. 18 total Bruins were in the stands. All 18 of those players were fined $500, and 3 of those players were suspended for a total of 20 games. To prevent this from happening again, they increased the security around the players and raised the height of the glass around the perimeter. There's other events of this happening. Dodgers game where a fan reached into the dugout and stole a player's hat and hit him in the back of the head. This usually happen. These cases happen uh, whenever there's some lack of security in between the players and the fans. Um, so to prevent this, uh, all that needs to be done is just there needs to be an established police presence or some sort of security that monitors the behavior of the fans at these games, especially when they're so close together. Other things that can be done to prevent this type of uh, activity uh, that the NBA does is uh, is just to promote this behavior before the game and also throughout the game. Just make an announcement of just what the expectation is as far as fan behavior is concerned, and so that no one can play dumb and act like they didn't know. They can say these inappropriate things to players. Um, you know, remove any sort of person that goes against these guidelines, even if they're season ticket holders. And one thing the NBA does is even if the season ticket holder gives their tickets away, they could still lose their seat if that person, again, breaks any of these guidelines. Uh, Other things you could do is just limit the amount of live replays that are shown, um, especially ones that are controversial as far as like calls a referee may make or something like that. Just encourage just positive cheers from the cheerleaders and the fan base, just to drown out any sort of negative comments that may be made, and just to get rid of that in general. But Lee just got to continue to establish these guidelines, making these events safe for the players and also still enjoyable for the fans. It just needs to be a positive experience, and uh, just making sure these guidelines are communicated clearly and that they're upheld throughout the game.